I was handed over for adoption at 6 weeks into a family that had just suffered a trauma. And what the EFT does is it opens up the subconscious mind. So then more details of the story come to mind. So you would tap on, I really, really want whatever it is you're craving. I really, really want that, and acknowledge the wanting, the craving, and that will release its hold. Now, at that point, the emotion that you're trying to suppress might become available to you.
Hi, Anne. Welcome to the Inside Addiction podcast. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Luke. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So I wonder if you could start off just by telling our audience a bit about your story of what life was like growing up and any kind of major events that happened in your life.
Okay, yeah, I think most of us have some kind of trauma in our childhoods, and I've certainly had a lot worse than mine, but I did have some significant trauma in childhood, starting actually right at birth, because I was born with my right foot up against my right shin and had about 6 weeks of physical therapy type thing to release that foot. And I was handed over for adoption at 6 weeks. So it was delayed while I went through that physical therapy process. And then I was handed over into a family that had just suffered a trauma because they had adopted a little boy who was then 2, and then they adopted another little girl, and the birth mother changed her mind. So they had to hand that baby back to the birth mother.
Oh, wow.
And I was the replacement into the family for that loss. So I don't, parents really connected with me very much because they were afraid this thing happened to me. So at that point, we started to move around the world because my dad worked for an international company. So we moved to Barbados first, then we moved to Sierra Leone in West Africa. And while I was there was a house fire, and I was the one who woke up in the morning and found the flames coming in through my bedroom wall. So I alerted the family to the fire at that point. So that was a significant trauma too. And part of that trauma was I actually got up and went to the top of the stairs. It was early morning, so my dad was downstairs with the radio on, drinking his coffee. And I shouted down, "There's a fire in my bedroom, Dad." And he replied and said, "No, there can't be." Now, I was 3 or 4 at the time, so that was a significant trauma, right? That set in a belief that what I say is not important. It's not believed.
Yeah.
Because, why would a little child who's 3 or 4 years old lie about something like that?
Yeah.
Clearly they wouldn't.
Yeah.
So that was one of the traumas. And then after Sierra Leone, we moved to Hong Kong. And while I was in Hong Kong, at the age of 9, I was sent to boarding school in England, which is a long way away. And I was sent to a boys' boarding school because my brother was there. So I was the only girl boarder for the first year. There were day girls, but I was the only girl after everyone else went home from school. And I was teased mercilessly at that school. It was not a good thing. So that definitely sat inside of me a trauma as a fear of boys of that age. And then after that was my teenage years. I went to then a girls' boarding school. But my parents, when I went home for vacations, my parents both became alcoholics in those years. And life at home was really very difficult because one of them would drink during the lunchtime hours and the other one would start drinking early afternoon and drink the rest of the day. So,
And what was that like growing up with alcoholics as parents?
Well, I used to say that I lived in hell at home because I couldn't trust anything they'd say. They'd say something in the morning, and by the evening, they would totally reverse what they'd said because they were in a different state. So it was not at all easy. And my mother was diagnosed with cancer when I was about 18 or so. She died when I was 19. I woke up one morning and found her dead on the bathroom floor. So that was a significant trauma as well. And that was kind of the culmination of those traumas. But we'd been taught, not necessarily taught consciously, but we'd been subconsciously taught to hold everything inside and not talk about it. And we didn't. We only ever talked about my mum's cancer the one time when we were told that she had it. We never discussed it again, which kind of blows my mind to this day. But I just carried on with life, just holding everything in. I just did not know how much it was affecting me all those years, I didn't know until something happened in my late 30s that made me realize that all this trauma from childhood was still affecting me to that
Yeah.
day.
And before you got to that point in your 30s, did you try any therapies, anything like that? Or were you just pushing everything down, just kind of doing your best to cope with it?
I was looking outside of myself. Now, I did have digestive issues, which I'm sure were caused by that. So I would try different diets. I would, read a lot of books and listen to a lot of teachers in all sorts of different areas. But I was always looking outside of me, trying to find the answer. And, we hear that really the answer's inside of us, but I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where I was looking. I did not know that childhood was affecting me. And it was this one event that happened, which was, I call it like a business altercation with a couple of other mothers at my boys' school. And they told me I had done something wrong. Now, these women, there were two of them, they were very self-confident, self-assured, authority type figures in my mind. And they told me, this really scared mother on the inside, they told me I'd done something wrong. And my mind just spun out of control. Over and over, it went for 3 days. I couldn't sleep. I just kept thinking about what I'd done, what I'd said, what I could have done differently, what they'd said. I just could not stop my mind spinning. And it was the end of that time frame that I realized two things. First of all, this is not normal. I had to realize that because, I didn't know anyone else who would have reacted so intensely to something that really wasn't a big deal. But then I also realized it felt a little bit like how I would react as a child when my dad had told me I'd done something wrong. So that was the little opening, a little inkling that maybe my childhood was affecting me. And that's when I started looking more inside. Although I didn't know at the time what to do, because I'd been doing all these things outside of myself. I didn't know where to go with it. But it was in that time frame I had a doctor's appointment. And he was a holistic physician, so he had more tools in his toolbox than many doctors do. And it was in California, and that might help. Californians tend to be more alternative. And he recognized that I was more stressed than I should be. Because I was a stay-at-home mother with 2 healthy young boys, it shouldn't have been as stressful as that. And he asked me on a scale of 0 through 10 what my stress level was, and I said 8. And then he asked me why. And it was that question that made me realize, it was finding my mother dead on the bathroom floor when I was 19, because the tears from that event were still just under the surface. All those years later, this was my late 30s, and it happened when I was 19. So I had suppressed all those emotions and all that energy inside of me that was affecting me in my day-to-day life, but I had not been aware of it up until that point. And he happened to know this technique that's called EFT, which I know you're familiar with, at least the name of it.
Yeah. And for our listeners, could you describe a bit about what EFT is?
Sure. It's called Emotional Freedom Technique, which is, I thought, a really hokey name at the time. It just sounded really weird. And it's also called tapping because we're tapping on certain places, which are the ends of meridian systems. We're tapping on those on our body as we're talking something through. So a memory of something that happened. And it's the tapping process itself that releases the stuck energy in the nervous system so that you can then release the emotions, and it's actually gone from the body. So he did that with me for about 15 minutes about my mother's death. And I walked away from that appointment for the first time ever, being able to tell a story in my mind without those tears there.
Okay, so it freed you so much from that emotions. And just to clarify, you were tapping your head, your top of your eyebrows, your cheekbones, your chin, your collarbones. Is that right? So you're tapping on these parts of your body to release those emotions.
Yes. So it's a series of points. You got some of them, there's a few more, a series of 9 points, and you just tap on them as you're talking through. So I would talk through the story of finding her on the bathroom floor and tap as I'm doing it, and that releases the energy. But then you go back and tell the story again. And what the EFT does is it opens up the subconscious mind, so then more details of the story come to mind. And then you tap as you're talking through those. And then you go back to the beginning of the story again, and you tap through it again. And you keep going until the story has lost all its charge. And it just feels like you're reading from a book. And at that point, you've released that energy from it. So it's really very powerful.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. And as you left that practitioner's office, like you say, you felt some relief, right? You felt that those tears weren't so close to the surface.
Yeah, that's the first time I realized that we hold those emotions in our body physically and that we can let them go. It was such a fast shift for me that I knew there was something powerful to it. And I'd been looking for something that would work, quickly, as quickly as possible. So I went home that day and I learned everything I could about EFT because it was given away by Gary Craig for free. So anyone can learn it online. It's easy to learn. You can learn it in 5 minutes. But then doing it, right? Doing it itself is actually, the key. So I actually wanted to try it out because I was a software engineer. I like to know things work and I kind of like to know why. There wasn't a lot of why at that point, but I still wanted to try it out. So at the time, I had a 17-year-old cat at home and his kidneys were starting to fail. So we'd been told we had to give him a daily saline shot, like an injection of saline solutions. And the first time I did that, my hand was shaking so badly because I was so afraid of giving him this injection. So I thought, well, why not try out this technique? So I did. So I tapped about every aspect of it, which is something you do with EFT. So I tapped about my hand shaking. I tapped about my fear of hurting him. And I tapped about all the memories from all the injections I had had from going from country to country. I had a lot in childhood. And the next day, when I gave him that shot, the needle just slid right in. So all that fear that had been living inside of me the day before had totally disappeared. So that's when I realized firstly, how powerful EFT was, because I really hadn't been sure up until that point. But then I also realized that there's this kind of life beyond those emotions. It's just energy that's stuck inside of us. And once it's released, there's freedom. So that's when I also realized that EFT, right, emotional freedom technique, it's actually a really good name for the technique because it provides emotional freedom.
Yeah, yeah. It says, it says it on the tin, right? That's what it does. It frees you from the emotions. But like I say, for you were doing it on yourself. And just to clarify for people, can they do it on themselves? Do you need someone to do it with you, or can you do it by yourself? How does it work in terms of that context?
Okay, multiple different ways. There are many EFT practitioners. So if you need help, you can go to someone else. You can do it yourself. I was not willing to be vulnerable with anyone else, but I was willing to be vulnerable with myself. So I did it with myself. But we can also tap on other people. So if you, the mother or a parent of a young child, right, who's having some difficulties, you can always tap on those, or maybe an elderly person. One time I was on a plane and it was going to be a long international flight, and this baby was screaming. And you know how people don't like screaming babies on planes. So I asked the father if he would swap places with me. And then I asked the mother if it would be okay if I gently tapped on her son. And she let me. And I just tapped on his points for a couple of rounds. And he fell asleep in his mother's arms. He just
Wow.
needed that release of that energy from his nervous system to be able to relax into sleep. So, yes, you can use it multiple ways.
Yeah, well, that's amazing. That's amazing. I bet all of us are thinking, we'd love to know that when there's a screaming baby on a plane, like you said. Um, and yeah, especially as a mother, all of the mothers listening, being able to calm your children down, regulate their emotions, and use this for that purpose is really, really good. So that's amazing. That's amazing. And
Yeah.
in terms of you, Anne, so in your story, you came out of this doctor's office. What happened then? What were the next kind of few steps of your life?
Well, I realized how powerful it was, so I started to use it every day. So the first thing that everyone has to do, and it's not easy to do if you've not done it before, is actually start noticing when you're emotional, right? If so, noticing you're becoming frustrated or you're becoming angry, rather than just being angry and expressing it, you actually notice and you stand back and say, okay, look at me, I'm starting to become frustrated. And then at that point, I would tap and I would bring myself back to peace. And I realized that over time, over the weeks, I was becoming more peaceful on the inside. And I wanted it to go faster. I wanted more and I wanted faster. So what I did is I wrote down every emotional memory I could think of from my whole life. And it was multiple pages, the big traumas, the little traumas, the humiliations, the embarrassments, all those things. And I tapped through one each night for about an hour to an hour and a half each night. because I was determined to change. And over the weeks, life just started to change. My mind, which had always been very busy, I believe I'd had PTSD from mostly my dad's anger, and my mind was becoming quiet. And I'd never experienced that before. And it was at that point that I realized that all the phrases that my mind would say, like I'd be self-critical, self-judgment, and of other people, those phrases had been programmed in me from my childhood, mostly my dad's, and my mind would just replay them over and over again. But I could not see that until they had gone. And my mind was quiet, and those phrases weren't there. The self-critical phrases weren't in my mind anymore. And that was huge. I had no idea that was possible before. So that was kind of the first step on my journey, was using the EFT.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. And like you say, you wrote down all your traumas you went through and tapped through them in a way. And how long were you tapping for? How long did this process go on for? Was it like a week, a day, 10 years? Like, how long did it take?
Yeah, it's hard to know looking back, but it was probably a couple of years at that
Yeah,
point. And what I realized EFT is doing, it's opening up the subconscious mind. And as the subconscious mind opens up, it kind of happens hand in hand. It is one and the same thing. Our self-awareness deepens. So when I started this journey, I did not know how I felt. If someone asked me, how are you doing today? I would always say I'm fine, because I really didn't know. I wasn't willing to look inside. But as I did more and more tapping, I became aware of my emotions. So, I would be able to say exactly how I was feeling if someone asked me. But then there's another layer. Actually, there's more than one layer. But the next layer down is the physical sensations underneath the emotions. So if we're feeling frustrated, we're actually holding tension in our body. And we can become aware of that tension. It's almost like we're reversing the process. When we're children, or when we have a child, we teach them what those words mean. Like, what does frustrated mean? How do we teach them? Well, we'll show them someone who's frustrated, and they will see how they're holding themselves. They'll see that tension inside of them, or they'll notice it inside of themselves. Okay, when I'm feeling this way, it is called frustration. So this is kind of reversal of that process. So if I'm feeling frustrated, where am I feeling that tension in my body? A lot of us are not aware of it. I certainly wasn't aware of it until I started to do this work and reverse that process and became aware of that tension inside. So when I was aware at that deeper level, I didn't feel like I needed to do EFT anymore, because I could focus on the tension itself. So then I taught myself to do what I call feeling your feelings. And it sounds obvious, right? Of course, you got to feel your feelings. But when you suppress them for so many years, they don't know how to be felt. So that was a process, and I can explain it if you want to, but I want to check if you've got any questions at this point.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think feeling your feelings is really, really good. And especially for a lot of clients who struggle with addiction, right? One of the reasons we drink or use drugs is because we can't regulate our emotions. We can't feel our feelings. We want to change the way we feel by drinking and getting out of our head and numbing our feelings and turning ourselves off. So, like you say, the tapping allowed you to start to recognize your feelings and become aware of them. And then the next part of the process was learning to feel your feelings, which is insanely valuable as well. So take us through that process.
Okay. Yeah. So I differentiate the emotions and the feelings. So when I talk about the emotions, that's more like the word, right? So frustration is the emotion, whereas the feelings are the physical sensations. That's the way I differentiate them.
Yeah.
So if I'm only aware of the emotions, I would use tapping. I would use EFT to allow myself to access the deeper level of the physical sensations. But once you're aware of those physical sensations, I was actually in a group at the time, and the kind of guru in the group, he'd say every week, you don't have to meditate. It's all about feeling your feelings. But when we suppress them so much, or we know how uncomfortable they are and we want to suppress them, we have a hard time accessing them. So that's why, to begin with, EFT is so good, because you don't really have to be able to feel them. But once you're aware of them, one day I was doing the dishes at the kitchen sink, and I thought, okay, he says this every week. He says it's just about feeling your feelings. Let me see if I can do that. And so I would think a thought, or catch myself thinking a thought that had some emotion. So maybe something as simple as, I'm afraid of making this phone call. So then I would find that fear inside of me, So fear, I find fear sits in my solar plexus and in my stomach area. So I would notice where that fear was, and then I would put my attention on it. So I'm not thinking about the fear, I'm feeling it in my solar plexus. So I would want to feel it because he said it's feeling your feelings. So how do I feel it? Well, what I realized is if I move, I would lose the ability to feel it. My mind would go somewhere else. And if I took a deep breath, I would lose the focus on that feeling. So I realized I had to hold myself like a statue once I was aware of that fear. So I was doing the dishes. I think this thought, catch it, and then I would just stop and hold myself like a statue. As soon as I had my focus on the fear or the physical sensations in my solar plexus, and then I would talk to it, and just to keep my focus on it. So I'd say things like, okay, I can feel you fear. I can feel you sitting right there in my solar plexus. I can feel you. I just want to feel you. I want to allow you to be felt. And then I'd have to take a deep breath, obviously, because I'd been holding my breath, like I'd stopped in my breath when I could feel the fear. And I'd noticed that the fear would have diminished a little bit. So then I would do the same thing. I'd think the same thought again. I'm afraid of making this phone call. Feel that fear where it is, and just hold myself like a statue and just talk to it. Take a deep breath, and it would have released again. And I would do it over and over again with the same thought until the fear had totally dissipated, at which point it becomes easy to make the phone call because the fear has gone. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And rather than changing the way you feel with like a drink or a drug, you're actually soothing your emotions, right? And calming them down and calming the feelings down, the physical sensation, and also, like you say, the emotion as well. And you're actually processing them at the same time.
Right, because it's just energy that's stuck in the body. Right. Once my mind really got a hold of that, it changed things because I'm feeling that energy. It's just energy that's been stuck in the body. So all we're doing is finding a way to allow it to release. It was energy we suppressed in the past, so it's stuck inside. And once it's been acknowledged and accepted and felt, it dissipates. So
Yeah,
once you
and
really practice that and really understand that that's what happens, it becomes easier to do the work.
yeah, exactly. And just reminded me what came up for me as you were speaking, right, was the baby on the aeroplane, right? The baby can't communicate and say, I'm really anxious about this flight. The baby's just going bonkers, crying, screaming, because that's what the baby's doing, releasing the energy in the way that the baby knows to release the energy. What you did in the example of the baby on the plane was do the tapping in order to allow it to release the energy in a healthier way. And like you say, you've then taken that even further now where you're at in terms of doing it with your sense of presence and being aware.
Yeah, and focus. So out of the mind, out of the thinking mind and into the feeling body. So like imagine, feel what your left knee feels like right now. As I
Yeah,
say that, you come out of your thinking, right? You don't think about it, but you go into the knee and you feel it, you sense it.
yeah,
Yeah, so that's slightly, it's a hard concept to get if you've not experienced it before, but that's what I was doing. That's what I was feeling. So it was different than the EFT. Same process, really. You're focusing on something. We start out with words with EFT. You're just really using words. But those words and those emotions are actually also in the physical body. So as your self-awareness deepens, you can access that tension in the physical body.
yeah. And I mean, how does that work practically? It sounds like quite a lot of work to always be walking around, being aware, going into the feelings, processing every single feeling throughout the whole day. Like, how did you integrate that with your life, with kids, and like all the other things going on in your world? How did it actually work in practice?
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? So I would sometimes, if I was emotional during the day and I was aware that I was, I might go into my bedroom, my bathroom, just tap and just allow that energy to release. But with the feelings, I would do it more when I was quiet. So when I was doing the dishes, maybe in the evenings, instead of tapping, now I would lay on the sofa. I was very present for my family. If they needed anything, I could just snap out immediately. But I would lay there and I would feel the feelings of more collective traumas because I'd done my childhood at this point. So I would think about things like, for me in California, the Loma Prieta earthquake or 9/11. All those memories had emotions stored with them. So I would just feel them and allow them to release. And it felt great. because it's old tension that's just been stuck inside. So I would really enjoy doing it. And it was kind of during that time frame eventually, and I can't remember again how many months that I worked on this, but at some point I realized I could keep my awareness inside my body after the tension had released, which sounds like a weird thing to say, and it was a really weird thing to experience at the time. I'd never heard of it before. I didn't know it was possible. So let me give you kind of an example of maybe how you can understand it. So
Yeah.
imagine you have a toothache or a stomach ache. You can sense where that pain is coming from, right? You can feel the tooth or you can feel the stomach ache. But once the pain is dissipated, you can't get your awareness back to that tooth place again or to the stomach. I realized I could. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was kind of playing around. I realized I did it once and, like, can I do it again? So I tried to do it again. I realized I could. And then I started to play. So I put my awareness inside. Now what? So I've moved my awareness to the side. So I was working in my abdomen at the time, in my stomach area, and I've moved my awareness around to the right. And I noticed I could feel a place with tension compared to a place with no tension. I could tell the difference. So then I would find a place with tension, focus on it, talk to it like I had done before, and it would dissipate a little bit. And then I would do it again and again and again. So I'm doing the exact same thing that I was doing with the feelings, but now I'm inside the body working on tension. And so I would play doing that. It was kind of fun, to be honest.
Yeah, and releasing all the tension in your body and in the physical body. And you mentioned, like, when you were growing up, having some gut problems and trouble with some of the physical things in your life and the way your body was physically responding to stress and trauma. What happened on that side of things as you were going through this journey? How did your physiology change?
Well, I just became more peaceful on the inside. But yes, I mean, tensions inside that I had not been aware of came back to light. So that isn't always fun because we don't really know what we've hidden inside. And so things started to release over time. So it took many, many months, but eventually I got my awareness inside my head. And that was huge for me because the pain and the tension inside my left cheek was almost unbearable. And what I realized is it had been there my whole life. Since I was born with my right foot up against my right shin, my whole body had been twisted or torqued. Had scoliosis, have scoliosis. My whole jaw was kind of off kilter. It still is a little bit. But I hadn't been aware of that pain inside for 50 years. It had been hidden, suppressed in my subconscious until I was ready to deal with it. So at that point, I had this technique so I could focus on the inside to begin with, only for a second at a time because it was so intensely painful. But over time, I would just do it again and again, and things would start to loosen up and release. So my neck has released so much over these years. I've actually grown 3/4 of an inch because
Oh,
of
wow.
that release of the tension that's been stuck inside. And my skull bones have shifted, my eye sockets aligned, my jaw was way off to the side, it's much more centered. And I had no idea that those things were possible. I didn't really even know they were happening. I mean, I could sense things were relaxing. I could feel my skull bones relax. And I had not known they were not relaxed until they relaxed. And it wasn't until I had the x-rays taken that I could see from previous x-rays how much had shifted. So now I know how incredibly powerful this is and that we can make huge physical changes.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. And you had some brain scans, right? And on your actual brain, right? And on your skull, like an X-ray. Sorry. Tell us a bit more about that side of things.
Yeah, so it was just orthodontic x-rays. I've had lots of orthodontics throughout my life. So when I had the most recent ones taken, I thought, well, I knew I could feel things were shifting. So I thought, well, let me look at old ones. And I had ones that were from 8 years prior. And I could see the changes. I could see that things had moved around. So that's when I started to realize how powerful this is and what we can do. And I believe that as we release tension, I think we're supposed to be fully symmetrical. right? Most of us are not symmetrical. One side of our face is different from the other. And I think in releasing this tension, because now I'm releasing tension in my palate bones and in my cheekbones and my neck still, the atlas bones and things back there, I can sense inside. So I know exactly where I'm working. And I think eventually all that tension will release and the skull will become symmetrical, become totally balanced, right? So I'm becoming, as within, so without is totally true. So as we become more physically balanced, we also become more mentally and emotionally balanced. They all work hand in hand. So I think that's what the future holds.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. And you mentioned that your trauma was kind of done, and you wrote that list of all the different things that happened in your life and went through them. What does that mean, your trauma being done? Does that mean it never came up? Like, what does that mean to you?
It means the thoughts never come back, right? So I can talk about some of the dark things that happened. You know, sometimes I will trigger other people by doing that, but it doesn't trigger me anymore. There's no emotion left in it. So it's not affecting me in a day-to-day sense. I think a lot of us are still affected, but we don't know we're affected by those traumas. But once we've released it, it's another form of forgiveness. I think people often think about forgiveness as being something to do with the other person. But when we're forgiving someone, we're actually helping ourselves, because that tension from those traumas, right? I can sense, because I can sense inside now, right? I have that depth of awareness that I did not have before. That trauma is stored inside as dis-ease. So it affects us on a day-to-day basis, but we're not aware of it. Until we start doing this work, we become aware of it and we let go of it. And that helps us. It helps us on all levels, because we've released disease in the physical body. Obviously, it's going to help us.
Yeah, that's amazing. And for people listening who are, a family member of someone who's drinking or using drugs, or someone who's trying to get their own drink and drug use under control, what's the first few steps they can take to kind of help start regulating their emotions, regulating their thoughts, so they don't have to keep turning to drink and drugs to change the way they feel?
Right. So it's always us. We always have to come back to us. Even when we were talking about being a mother, right? If we have an out of control child, we always want to tap on ourselves first, because we want to bring ourselves back to peace so that we can work with the other person. And in my family life, me changing myself to be more peaceful changed the whole household to be more peaceful, right? So no one else had to do the work. I had to do the work myself. So if someone else is having issues with addiction, we still want to work with ourselves and bring ourselves back to peace. And that remarkably helps to change the other person as well. So the first step is always noticing what we're feeling, right? Regardless of what we're talking about, whether it's addiction or anything else. If we can't notice how we're feeling, we can't do anything about it. So that's the number one thing. Just start noticing during the day when you're starting to become emotional. Then you can use a technique. If you have a technique already, you can use it at that point. But I recommend EFT just because it's so easy and it's free and anyone can do it. Or feeling your feelings if you have that depth of awareness, and just being truthful to ourselves. So when we're tapping, we're not talking about the positive or what we think we should be thinking. We're trying to find exactly what we are thinking, however dark it is, because it's just energy that's stuck inside. So I got to the place where I tapped for a long time over, I hate myself. I had to remove a lot of layers before I got to that realization. But I tapped for probably hours, over weeks, a few weeks, about that phrase, I hate myself. Now, when I started out with that phrase, it had a lot of energy and a lot of emotion around it. But I tapped for long enough that then it's just words. It's just 3 words, I hate myself. It no longer has any power over me, whereas to begin with, it did. So it's finding what you're truly thinking, whether it's, I hate my spouse, I hate that they're drinking, whatever it is, those are the words that you would tap with to allow that energy to release.
Yeah. Okay. And as I go inwards and look at my emotions, say that brings up more emotions and I feel triggered and I start to spiral, what do I do then? Do I keep looking inwards? Do I keep going? Do I have to go through it? Like, what's the process?
Well, if it's becoming too much, then you just stop trying to think about it and just tap, right? And then you can always come back to it at another time. But you're right, as you tap through one thing, it will probably bring up memories from something else that happened that was very similar, because they're all attached inside of us. What I realized over the years, and this isn't well talked about by other people, but because I can sense inside, I know this to be the case. It's all stored in our connective tissue. And our connective tissue is just like it said, it's all connected. It's throughout our body. So those memories are all stored in a similar way, connected to each other, which is why EFT is so powerful, because it releases one memory or one emotion, and then the one that's right underneath or close by will pop into our mind, and then we can work through that. So that's how I worked through my childhood. Tap through one thing, a memory of a similar thing would come up, I'd tap through that, and then a memory again would tap through that. So it just gets deeper and deeper. But that realization that it's just energy stuck in the body, if people can get hold of that and really understand it, it really helps, because then you realize, okay, if I work through this, it's going to release, and then I can come back another time and release another bit of the energy that's stored inside.
Yeah, and you can keep going and keep releasing and keep peeling back the kind of layers of the onion and keep tapping, keep feeling the emotions, letting the energy out, processing the energy, and just keep going in deeper and deeper, like you have and like you've explained, right, until you don't feel so much emotional charge around that.
Yeah. Now, some people might not want to do the childhood stuff. I mean, you could just use EFT on a daily basis whenever you're feeling triggered,
Yeah.
right? I wanted more and I wanted faster, which is why I went through all my childhood. But you don't have to do that if it's too much and you just want to do it on a day-to-day basis. That itself is going to change you as well.
Yeah, so you could use it for cravings, for example, right? If I'm really craving, I really want to go and drink or use drugs, and I'm really just like everything in my body, my whole physiology is saying go and drink and use. You're really craving, really triggered. You could just take a breath, do your tapping, keep tapping, and go through the process and calm those cravings down, let the energy out, and means that you don't have to act on it. You're just processing that energy in your body.
Yes. So you would tap on, I really, really want whatever it is you're craving. I really, really want that, and acknowledge the wanting, the craving, and that will release its hold. Now, at that point, the emotion that you're trying to suppress might become available to you. And then you could tap on that, because maybe it's a memory that you're trying to squash down with the craving. Once the craving's released, you might get that memory might pop up. And if you realize that it's just stuck energy, you might be willing to look at it and realize that it's just stuck energy, and work on that memory and release it. And that will also then help next time. You're likely, the craving is likely to have shifted somewhat. It will be slightly different, and then you'll tap again. And then the time after that, it will be slightly different again. And eventually you'll get to the place where you're not craving it, because you've cleared out the energy that's stuck inside.
Yeah, and what if people say to you, look, Anne, I'm scared. I'm scared of confronting my trauma. I'm hesitant to open all of this baggage, all of this stuff. What would you say to someone who's scared of experiencing those feelings?
It is scary. And I would say tap on feeling scared. Tap on, right? Acknowledge that fear of what's going to happen, but also realize that it is stuck energy, and just try it out. That's like I tried it out on the cat, right? That wasn't a big stuck energy for me. It was a small thing, and that made me realize, okay, there is life after, right? We can get through that darkness, and on the other side is light. So yes, acknowledge how scary it is, but realize it's not anywhere else, right? Those memories and that trauma and the darkness, it's just stuck inside of us. It's not outside there, it's just inside of us, and we can get through it. We can let it go and get through it.
So like you say, start with the low stakes, like I was late for work, not some big death or trauma or something that happened in your life. Start with the low stakes stuff, build up your confidence, your competence, start to work your way up. And then when you feel like you're used to releasing little bits of energy, you can kind of open the floodgates a bit more, so to speak, let a bit more out gradually and slowly process your trauma. And like you did, you're like, right, I want it fast, I want to go now, I'm ready. You wrote everything down and you went boom, 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 boom. I'm sure it definitely wasn't as simple as I just made it, but you went boom, 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 and worked through it all.
Yeah. Yeah. It depends how fast you want to go and how much you can deal with.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. And as we come towards the end, Anne, is there anything you want to leave the audience with? Anywhere they can find out more about you?
Sure, there's several ways. I'm pretty active on Facebook if you want to read anything that's on there. I also have a YouTube channel that I put videos out about this work, and it's pretty deep. I think it's pretty deep for people who want to understand at a deep level. So try that. I also have my book. It's called A Pathway to Insight, and a workbook that goes with it if you really want to dig up your past. I have a lot of questions in there that will help you do that. But I just encourage you to do this work because I actually think it will change our world. I mean, it will change your personal world, and I think it will change the collective world.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. And to everyone listening, we'll link to Anne's book down in the description, so you can kind of have a look at that and check that out. And also, yeah, go through the workbook, right? Go through the workbook, do the work on it. I think it's really, really important. Anything else you want to leave the audience with before we sign off?
Well, yes, one thing I do love to share that we didn't talk about is the depth of life that is available to us that I had no idea about before. And I think a lot of us don't when we're stuck in that trauma. We some of us want to give up on life. But when you start doing this work, you realize how much more there is to life than we really know about at all. So, for example, I can sense music. I can hear music throughout my body, not just through my ears. And it's like, I've never heard of that before. I had no idea that was available. And I can sense why people do things they do and why things happen in the world that I had no idea about before. And because I've changed the tension in my skull, my voice sounds different. I can sing in a way that I could not sing before. There used to be some notes that I couldn't sing, and they're available to me now because of that release of tension inside. So there's all sorts of aspects to life that are available if we do this work that most of us do not know about.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. And yeah, it's definitely on the other side of your trauma. You can have such a great life, right? When you stop drinking, stop doing drugs, stops all of that stuff, and also have a better impact on the people around you. Like, you've experienced some consequences as a result of people's drinking and using drugs. So have I, with my mum and the people in my life. So definitely you can help the people around you, right, as well, by doing this work and not passing on the generational trauma and helping yourself, helping other people. And that good energy just kind of vibrates throughout the world.
It does. And we become more peaceful. I mean, I'm more peaceful in so many situations where I used to be jumpy all the time. So to me, that's the ultimate goal, is to be imperturbable, right? To be able to stand with whatever's happening around us and remain at peace. And that's a great feeling when you've been jumpy your whole life, to actually be at peace. So yeah, and be light and be able to laugh at yourself and at things around you and not hold back, where I think a lot of people do. I used to. Yes.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And it's really good to, like you say, not to be able to hold back, to be able to weather any storm, right? And to be able to get through anything life throws at you, and to have that confidence is really, really amazing.
Yeah, especially to experience the contrast of where we used to be and where we are now.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Well, and thanks very much for sharing today. Thanks very much for coming on the podcast and sharing some really valuable insights. And to everyone listening, go and check out Anne's YouTube channel, try some tapping, and we'll catch you on the next episode. So yeah, thanks very much for coming on the show today, Anne.
Thanks a lot, Luke. It's been great.